H1. The princess ignored him as a novice. The celestial dragons bowed. H2. Part 1. The novice who wasn't worth a glance. The station was the kind of place that made a person feel very small. Conclave Station Aurelius floated at the center of a system with no sun, held in place by 6 orbital anchors that each cost more than the entire GDP of early Earth. It was enormous, so enormous that clouds formed inside its upper corridors during humidity cycles, and the lower docking rings could hold 300 ships at once without crowding. Hundreds of alien species walked its halls, flew through its open interior sections, slithered along its curved corridors, and filled the air with the sound of 1,000 languages spoken all at once. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cole walked through all of it wearing standard Earth Fleet gray. He was not a tall man. He was not a particularly impressive one either. He had short brown hair, calm dark eyes, and the kind of face that people forgot about 5 minutes after meeting him. He carried a small worn satchel over one shoulder and a personal data tablet under his arm. He walked at an unhurried pace, looking at everything around him with quiet and honest curiosity, like a man who found the universe genuinely interesting and was in no rush to pretend otherwise. He was part of Earth's diplomatic delegation to the Grand Celestial Summit, the largest gathering the Conclave had held in over 200 years. Earth had been given entry-level status in the Conclave just 9 years ago. The other species still considered humanity a newcomer. Some of them used kinder words. Most did not bother using any words at all, because newcomers were not worth the breath. Nina Holt walked beside him. She was the delegation's communications officer, sharper, louder, and quicker to frustration than Ethan was. She had red hair pulled back tight, and the kind of eyes that noticed everything and forgave nothing. She was watching the aliens around them with open suspicion. "Don't stare," Ethan said without looking at her. "I'm observing professionally. You're staring at the Vrethian delegate like he owes you money." "He stepped on my foot at the docking gate and didn't acknowledge it. He has 12 feet. He probably didn't notice." She made a sound that was not quite a word and looked away. The opening reception for the summit was held in the grand atrium, a domed space so wide that the far walls were barely visible. The ceiling was made of layered transparent alloy, and beyond it, the stars burned cold and distant. Every major civilization had sent representatives dressed in their finest. The Karathi wore their traditional shell armor, polished to mirror brightness. The Vrethians glided in robes that shifted color with their mood. The Xanath ambassadors had brought musicians, who played instruments that produced sounds at frequencies humans could feel in their chests but not quite hear with their ears. And then there were the Solven. If the Conclave had a ruling class, the Solven were close to the top of it. They were tall, luminous beings with wide feathered wings folded against their backs, and skin that held a faint inner glow, like starlight trapped just beneath the surface. They measured everything: status, worth, intelligence, ambition, by a force they called auraic resonance, a kind of cosmic energy they believed a being either carried or did not. It could not be learned. It could not be earned. You had it, or you were invisible. Princess Liara of the Solven Empire had it in abundance. She stood at the center of the atrium, like she had been placed there by the architecture itself. She was tall even for a Solven, with wings of deep silver and gold that caught the light when she moved. Her court surrounded her in a loose formation: advisors, attendants, and Lord Soven, her senior diplomatic aide, who stood half a step behind her left shoulder and watched everyone with calm, measuring eyes. There was a greeting queue. Delegates were introduced to Princess Liara, one by one, as she was the highest-ranking diplomatic figure present. It was formal and slow, and most of the alien delegates clearly considered it a great honor. Ethan joined the queue because it was the correct thing to do. He waited, the line moved forward. When his turn came, he stepped up, offered a small and respectful nod, and introduced himself in clear and careful Solven dialect, a language he had spent 2 years learning from old Conclave audio archives, because the translation devices were unreliable and he believed in talking to people in their own words when possible. Princess Liara looked at him. It was not a long look. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Her eyes moved from his face to his delegation badge to this plain gray uniform, and something in her expression shifted. Not to cruelty, not exactly. It was something more detached than that. The way a person might glance at a chair and decide it was not interesting enough to sit on. She turned away. She said something quietly to Lord Sovin in a register of Solvan dialect that was above the formal level. Private, rapid, not meant for outside ears. But Ethan caught it anyway, because he had studied that register too. She said, "Remove the novice from the greeting queue. He doesn't carry enough standing for formal introduction." Lord Sovin stepped forward smoothly and said in the common conclave tongue that junior delegates were welcome to enjoy the reception and that the greeting queue was reserved for senior representatives. He said it pleasantly. He said it the way someone might close a door that was never fully open. Several nearby aliens heard it. A couple of them exchanged looks. A Vrethian delegate made a soft sound that was almost a laugh. Ethan nodded once. He stepped back. He walked to the edge of the room, found a table with drinks, and poured himself something that turned out to be a Xanath fruit beverage that tasted faintly of copper and warm grass. It was not unpleasant. Nina appeared at his elbow 30 seconds later, practically vibrating. "I watched the whole thing," she said. "I know," he said. "In the middle of your introduction." "Yes." "And her aide basically told you to get out of line." He was polite about it. "Ethan, Nina," he said calmly, "drop it. I have work to do." She stared at him. "How are you this calm?" He took another sip of the copper-grass drink and looked out across the atrium, where Princess Liara was now greeting a Korathi admiral with a warm and practiced smile. "Because being angry about it doesn't change anything," he said, "and I really do have work to do." Back in his small assigned quarters on the station's lower residential ring, Ethan sat down at his personal terminal. The screen filled with data, months of it, columns of code and frequency patterns and biological notation that would have looked like noise to anyone else. It was a signal. It had been coming from the Void Rim, a region beyond all charted space, for 6 months. Every translator in the conclave had tried to crack it. Every attempt had failed. Ethan had been working on it quietly, alone, in his off hours, ever since he first saw the frequency report buried in a low-priority conclave data release. He pulled up his latest notes and got to work. Outside the viewport, the stars were very still and very far away. He didn't notice. H1. The princess ignored him as a novice. The celestial dragons bowed. H2. Part 2. The signal nobody could read. P. The translation sessions were held every morning in Chamber 7 of the Conclave's upper diplomatic ring. Chamber 7 was a wide, circular room with tiered seating arranged around a central floor where speakers could stand and address everyone at once. The acoustics were designed so that even a whisper at the center could be heard clearly at the top row. The lighting was soft and even, adjusting automatically for the visual range of each species present. It was, in every technical sense, a perfect room for sharing ideas. It had not produced a single useful idea in 6 months. Princess Liara chaired the sessions with skill and patience. She stood at the center of the chamber each morning, her silver-gold wings folded neatly, her voice clear and composed. She introduced speakers, managed disagreements between delegates, and asked precise and intelligent questions. Whatever else she was good at this. The problem was that the best minds in the conclave were stuck. The Void Rim signal had been playing on loop for half a year. It was not random noise. Every analysis confirmed that. It had structure. It had pattern. It repeated in cycles that suggested intentional design. But it was not a language that matched anything in the conclave's database, which contained records of over 4,000 documented languages, living and dead. The Solvan mathematicians had built new algorithmic models to approach it. the Vrethian logic weavers, had attempted to map it against every known form of symbolic reasoning. The Korathi archivists, beings who had been cataloging knowledge for longer than most species had been alive, had searched their oldest records and found nothing similar. The signals simply refused to be understood. On the fourth morning of the summit, during an open commentary period, Ethan raised his hand from the back row. He had spent the night before preparing a single, clear, and careful question. Not a claim, not a presentation, just a question. One that he thought might point the group in a different direction if anyone was willing to follow it. Lord Sovan, who was managing the speaker list that morning, looked at Ethan's delegation badge, noted his entry-level rank, and nodded to him in a way that communicated both permission to speak and the expectation that it would not take long. Ethan stood. "Has anyone considered the possibility," he said, "that the signal isn't encoded in a linguistic structure at all? That it might be closer in form to a biological storage system, something like a memory encoding rather than a message?" The room was quiet for a moment. Then Lord Sovan said, in a pleasant and unhurried voice, that junior delegates were of course welcome to participate in open commentary, and that the observation was noted, and that the working group had already ruled out non-linguistic structures in its second month of analysis, and had found no evidence to support that line of inquiry. He said it like he was closing a cabinet drawer. 3 delegates in the middle rows turned to look at Ethan briefly. None of them looked like they were reconsidering anything. Ethan sat down. He had brought a small paper notepad, a habit he had developed years ago and never broken, because he found that writing by hand made him think differently than typing. He wrote his question down on a card, folded it once, and passed it forward through the row of delegates toward the central floor. It moved from hand to hand, or hand to claw to tentacle, depending on the delegate, and eventually reached a Korathi archivist seated near the front, who looked at it, then set it down on the seat beside him, and did not pass it further. Ethan wrote another note in his pad. "The card has been absorbed into the Korathi archive system." He underlined it. Then he turned the page and kept working. That evening, back in his quarters, he laid everything out for Nina. She sat on the edge of his bunk while he stood at his terminal, pulling up files and cross-referencing them on a second screen he had borrowed from the delegation storage room. The wall beside his desk was covered in printed sheets, frequency diagrams, biological notation charts, and a long handwritten timeline connecting dots that, to Nina's eye, looked completely unrelated. "Everyone is treating this signal like a spoken language," Ethan said, "or a mathematical language, something designed to communicate information from one mind to another in real time. But what if that's not what it is?" "Then what is it?" Nina asked. "Look at this." He pulled up a file from Earth's deep-sea biology archives, records from decades-old marine research, the kind of documentation that nobody had looked at in years because it had no obvious practical application. He pointed to a section on protein chain memory encoding in certain ancient deep-sea organisms. Some of these creatures don't have complex nervous systems, but they store generational memory in their biology, not in their brains, in their physical structure. It's not a signal they send, it's something they are. Nina looked at the screen, then at the void rim frequency diagram on the other screen, then back at Ethan. "You're saying the signal is biological," she said slowly. "I'm saying it's structured the same way. Look at the repeating intervals here." He pointed. "Every language-based analysis looks at those intervals as separators between units of meaning, like spaces between words. But if you look at them as protein folding markers, the whole thing reads differently. The repeating sections aren't separating words. They're reinforcing a structure, like how biological memory stabilizes itself over time." Nina was quiet for a moment. "Where did you get the idea to compare these two things?" "I was cataloging old Earth science archives for the delegation's cultural exchange database. The marine biology section was flagged as low priority, so nobody else had gotten to it. I was going through it at 2 in the morning, because I couldn't sleep, and I noticed the structural similarity by accident. By accident, Nina repeated. Most things are by accident, he said. She looked at his wall of papers and his 2 screens and the half-empty cup of cold coffee on the edge of his desk. If you're right about this, I'm not sure yet, he said. I need more time. But if you're right, why aren't you in that chamber every morning, pushing harder? Why are you letting Lord Soven shut you down in 45 seconds? Ethan was quiet for a moment. He picked up his coffee, noticed it was cold, and set it back down. Because walking into a room full of beings who have decided you're not worth listening to and raising your voice doesn't make them listen, he said. It just makes you easier to dismiss. The only thing that changes that is being right in a way they can't argue with. Nina thought about that. So you're going to sit in the back row and figure it out alone? For now, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood up and crossed to the terminal beside him. Show me what you have, she said. He showed her. They worked until past midnight. Outside the small viewport above Ethan's desk, the station drifted quietly through the dark, and somewhere far beyond the edge of the charted galaxy, the void rim signal kept playing, patient and steady, like something that had been waiting a very long time and had learned not to be in a hurry. On the 3rd screen that Ethan had running in the background, the one quietly processing frequency data through his custom biological memory decoding framework, a small counter was ticking upward. It read, 61% decoded. Neither of them noticed it yet. The princess ignored him as a novice. The celestial dragons bowed. Part 3, The Dragons of the Void. 3 days later, Ethan's decoder read 100%. He sat in front of his terminal at 4:30 in the morning, the station dark and quiet around him, and read what the signal said. He read it 3 times. Then he sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a while. Nina found him like that when she came in an hour later with 2 cups of hot coffee. She stopped in the doorway, looked at his face and said, "What happened?" He handed her the tablet. She read it. Then she sat down slowly on the edge of the bunk. "This can't be real," she said. "The decoding checks out every way I've run it," he said. "The structural match is consistent across every section. I've been over it all night." The signal was a greeting. Not a broadcast to the galaxy in general, not a scientific marker, not a territorial claim. It was a greeting addressed to specific species, and humanity was named among them. Not by the word human or Earth, but by an older name, one encoded in the biological memory structure itself, buried in the deep layer protein chains that matched the framework Ethan had built from the marine biology archives. The name translated roughly as, "the young ones who remember." The greeting said in simple and patient terms, "We are coming. We have been searching. We hope someone has kept the voice alive." Ethan went to Captain Louise Farr at 7 in the morning. Captain Farr was the head of the Earth delegation, a woman in her early 50s with short silver hair and steady gray eyes. She had the manner of someone who had spent 30 years solving problems that other people had given up on, and she had learned to distinguish between ideas that were exciting and ideas that were important. Ethan laid everything in front of her: the decoded signal, the biological framework, the structural analysis, the cross-reference to Earth's marine archives. She asked 4 questions. He answered all 4. She read it again. "You're confident in this decoding," she said. It was not quite a question. "Yes," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I'll get you in front of a small technical committee this afternoon. 3 people. No formal record, just a review. If they agree it holds up, we take it to the conclave floor." "Lord Soven won't grant floor time to an entry-level delegate," Ethan said. "No," she agreed. "But he might grant it to me if I present it as a delegation finding." She looked at him evenly. "You understand that means it gets attached to Earth's official record either way, if you're right or wrong." "I understand," he said. "Go get some sleep first. You look terrible." He slept for 2 hours. It was enough. The technical review was scheduled for 3 in the afternoon. It never happened. At 12 minutes past noon, every alert system on Conclave Station Aurelius activated at once. The sound was a deep, rolling tone that moved through the entire station like a physical wave, felt in floors and walls and the bones of every living thing on board. Emergency lighting shifted to a cooler spectrum. Automated announcements began in 40 simultaneous languages. 3 vessels had come out of a dimensional fold, 1,200 kilometers from the station. Ethan was in the corridor outside his quarters when it happened. He grabbed the wall railing as the station stabilizers compensated for an unexpected gravitational pulse. Around him, aliens were moving fast. Crew members in uniform running toward duty stations, civilian delegates pressing against the walls, attendants calling out in a dozen languages trying to account for their groups. He pulled out his tablet and connected to the station's external sensor feed. The 3 vessels on the screen were unlike anything in any database. They were vast. Each one was longer than the station itself, which meant each one was over 4 kilometers from end to end. They were not shaped like ships in any conventional sense. They were long and sinuous, with a kind of slow and organic curve to them, and their surfaces were covered in geometric patterns that pulsed with a steady cold light. They moved with a quiet, deliberate ease that made every human-made and alien-made ship in the docking ring look like toys by comparison. Every weapon system on every conclave vessel went to full alert. 3 Solvan warships that had been on patrol outside the station moved to intercept formation. A Vrethian combat unit powered up drives that lit the dark like small stars. The 3 vessels did not react. They simply drifted forward at an unhurried pace, the patterns on their surfaces continuing their slow pulse. Then they transmitted. The signal came through on every frequency at once. Translation systems across the station processed it instantly and returned the same answer from all of them. Unknown. Not unrecognized, not partially matched, completely, entirely unknown, as if the signal existed outside every framework they had. In Chamber 7, Princess Liara and her senior advisors watched the transmission data scroll past on the main display. Her expression was controlled, but her wings had shifted, a small involuntary movement that her people made when genuinely unsettled. Lord Sovin stood beside her, with his hands clasped, his usual composure showing the first fine cracks. "Analysis?" she asked quietly. "No match," Lord Sovin said. "We are running secondary and tertiary frameworks. Nothing." The Karathi archivist seated to her left, one of the oldest living beings in the conclave, leaned forward and said in a low voice, "I have never seen this structure before, not in 40,000 years of records." The chamber went very quiet. Then the vessels transmitted again, a shorter burst this time, sharper, different in structure from the first signal. It felt, to anyone listening, like a question. Every translation system in the galaxy failed to parse it. Except one. In his quarters, Ethan's terminal chimed. His custom decoder, the biological memory framework he had built from scratch over months of late nights, had been running in the background the entire time, as it always did. It processed the new transmission in 11 seconds. The result appeared in plain text on his screen. He read it. "We have come for the remembered ones. We ask, who among you carries the old voice?" He sat very still for exactly 4 seconds. Then he opened a communications channel on his modified harmonic emitter, a piece of equipment he had built from spare parts over the past 3 weeks, because he had started to suspect, based on the signal structure, that a standard transmitter would not be able to send a reply in the correct format. He had not told anyone about it, because he had not been sure he would ever need it. He was sure now. He did not respond in words. He responded in biological memory encoding, the same structural language as the signal itself, tapping out a carefully constructed reply through the emitter's harmonic settings. He had thought about what to say if this moment ever came. He said in the encoding's terms, "We are here." The voice was not lost. It was kept in the archives of creatures pulled from the deep sea, because we wanted to understand them. It took him 4 minutes to transmit. His hands were completely steady. He hit send. Then he waited. The station was silent around him. Outside, the 3 vast vessels drifted with their slow, cold light. 63 seconds passed. Then every screen on every deck of Conclave Station Aurelius lit up at once. The outer shells of the 3 vessels were moving. They were not breaking apart. They were unfolding. Slowly, with a kind of enormous and unhurried grace. The geometric plating drawing back to reveal what was underneath. What was underneath was alive. Each vessel was not a vessel at all. Each one was a creature, an ancient, enormous living being that had been folded inside its own outer form, the way a person might wrap themselves in a coat against the cold of space. As the shells pulled back, they stretched wide and long, their true shapes emerging into the light of the station's sensors. Long, sinuous, burning with a cold, deep light. Heads that turned slowly toward the station with the patient certainty of something that had been searching for 40,000 years and had finally, at last, found what it was looking for. On the station's observation deck, a young Korathi crew member whispered a word in his own language. The word translated as dragons. In Chamber 7, Princess Liara stared at the main display and said nothing at all. And in his small quarters on the lower residential ring, Ethan Cole looked at the 3 ancient beings, turning their vast faces toward his signal, and he let out a long, slow breath. "Okay," he said quietly to no one. The princess ignored him as a novice. The celestial dragons bowed. Part 4. The Bow. The station did not know what to do. That was the honest truth of it. Conclave Station Aurelius had emergency protocols for nearly every situation. Hostile contact, system failure, biological contamination, political breakdown, and a dozen other categories of crisis that centuries of experience had taught the Conclave to prepare for. There were procedures for first contact with unknown species. There were procedures for handling vessels of unknown origin. There were no procedures for 3 ancient living beings the size of small cities, unfolding themselves outside your station and waiting patiently to speak to someone. The Conclave Security Council met an emergency session within minutes. Princess Liara chaired it by right of rank. Her composure returned and fully locked into place, though her wings had not quite settled back to their resting position. The Vrethian combat commander wanted to maintain weapons lock. The Solvan admiral requested permission to open targeted warning fire to establish a deterrence posture. Lord Sovan advised waiting. Nobody could agree on what to do because nobody understood what they were dealing with. The 3 beings, the Veil Ori, though the station did not yet know that name, simply waited. They did not advance. They did not retreat. The patterns on their now open forms continued their slow and steady pulse, and their vast faces remained turned toward the station with an expression that, if it could be described at all, seemed patient, not threatening, not demanding, just waiting. Captain Fair found Ethan 4 minutes after the council session began. She came to his quarters at something close to a run, which was the fastest Ethan had ever seen her move. She looked at his terminal. She looked at the decoded transmission on the screen. She looked at the harmonic emitter on his desk. "Tell me you responded," she said. "I did," he said. "And?" He turned the tablet toward her and showed her the new incoming data his decoder had just begun processing. A 3rd transmission from the Veil Ori, longer this time, coming in at a steady pace. She read the partial decode. Her expression shifted in a way that he had never seen before on her face. "Ethan," she said quietly. "I know," he said. "They're asking to speak to you specifically." "I know." She straightened up. "I'm going to go tell the Security Council that the Earth delegation has established contact," she said. "That is going to cause a fairly significant reaction." "I expect so," he said. "Do you need anything?" He thought about it. "A better chair," he said. "This one hurts my back." She almost smiled. Then she left. The Security Council's reaction was, as predicted, significant. Lord Sovin's composure fractured visibly when Captain Farr explained that an entry-level human delegate had been decoding the Void Rim signal privately for months, and had already responded to the Veil Ori using a custom-built device. The Vrethian commander made a sound that was universal across species for complete disbelief. Two of the Karathi archivists went very still, in a way that among their kind indicated profound recalculation. Princess Liara said nothing for a long moment. Then she asked, in a calm and measured voice, to see the decoded transmissions. They were brought to her on a tablet. She read them once, then again. She looked up and asked where the human delegate was now. He was in his quarters, still decoding. She asked that he be brought to the main observation deck. Ethan arrived at the observation deck to find it crowded. The room was a wide, curved space, with a full transparent wall facing the exterior of the station, giving an unobstructed view of the three Veil Ori waiting in the dark outside. Up close, or as close as the observation deck allowed, they were even more overwhelming than the sensor feed had suggested. Their scale was difficult to accept. The cold light that moved through them was not like any light source Ethan had seen. It felt older than that. It felt like the kind of light that existed before stars had names. Ethan sat down at a communications terminal that a crew member had set up for him, placed his harmonic emitter in the relay cradle, and continued the exchange. The third transmission finished decoding as he sat down. He read it carefully. The Veil Ori called themselves the First Witnesses. They had been moving through the galaxy and beyond it for longer than most civilizations had records. 40,000 years ago, they had seeded life on dozens of worlds, not randomly, but deliberately, encoding memory of themselves into the biological structure of the young species they helped bring forward. They had done this because they were old and had learned that old things disappear, and they did not want to disappear without leaving something behind. The memory encoding was simple in design, but required a specific kind of mind to rediscover, a mind that kept things, that cataloged even the things that seemed useless, that looked at a creature from the deep sea and thought, "This is worth understanding." Most civilizations, as they grew, burned through their old records in favor of new ones. They updated, they moved forward, they left the quiet and patient archives behind. Humanity, almost by accident, had not. The Veil Ori had been transmitting for 6 months, growing slowly closer, waiting to see if anyone answered in the correct form. The Conclave's best minds had tried and failed, not because they were not intelligent, they were very intelligent, but because the answer required knowing something they had decided was not worth knowing. Ethan began composing his reply. The room behind him was completely silent. Every being on that observation deck watched him work. Watched a human in fleet gray, sitting at a borrowed terminal with a handmade device, exchanging words with 3 ancient living beings outside the window. Princess Liara stood at the back of the room with Lord Sovin at her shoulder. She watched without speaking. The exchange continued for 40 minutes. Then the Elder Flame, the largest of the 3 Veil Ori, whose light was slightly warmer than the other 2, the way that the oldest flame in a fire always runs deeper, transmitted something that Ethan decoded, and then sat with for a moment before turning to Captain Farr. "They want to address the station," he said. "All of it. They want what they say to be heard by everyone present." Captain Farr looked at Princess Liara. Liara nodded once. The station-wide broadcast system opened. Ethan relayed the Elder Flame's words through his decoder, and Nina, standing at a secondary terminal, read them aloud into the broadcast, her voice steady and clear. "We searched 40,000 years," Nina read. "We did not expect to find the voice in so young a people. And yet here it is, unbroken, unintentional, kept in the records of creatures they pulled from the sea because they wanted to understand them. They did not know what they were keeping. They kept it anyway. This is rarer than power. This is rarer than age. We had begun to believe the voice was gone. We are glad to have been wrong." The observation deck was so quiet that the ambient sound of the station's ventilation system was the loudest thing in the room. Then the Elder Flame moved. It was slow, Everything the Veil Ori did was slow, not because they were weak, but because things that had existed for 40,000 years did not rush. Its vast form curved forward, toward the station, toward the observation deck, toward the transparent wall where a room full of every major civilization in the known galaxy stood watching. It lowered its head, a full, deliberate bow, its enormous luminous face dropping until it was level with the observation deck window, its great burning eyes looking directly at the room, at Ethan. The cold, ancient light in those eyes was steady and warm at the same time, the way very old things sometimes are. The other two Veil Ori followed, 3 beings older than recorded history, bowing to the observation deck of Conclave Station Aurelius. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Somewhere in the back of the room, a Karathi archivist made a sound that was not a word in any language, just a sound. The kind a person makes when something changes that they did not expect to change. Ethan looked at those ancient eyes for a long moment. Then he stood up from his terminal, faced the window, and bowed back. It was a small, simple human bow. Nothing elaborate, nothing showy. Just a quiet and respectful acknowledgement from one being to another. The Elder Flame's light pulsed once, slow and deep. Behind Ethan, Princess Lyara stood very still. Her wings, which had finally settled back to their resting position over the past hour, shifted again, just slightly. Her expression was unreadable. Lord Sovin, standing at her shoulder, said nothing. For once, there was nothing to say. The princess ignored him as a novice. The celestial dragons bowed. Part 5. What comes after? The days that followed were not quiet days. Conclave Station Aurelius, which was already the most politically active place in the known galaxy during a normal summit, became something that no one had a word for. Delegations held emergency sessions. Archivists requested access to the decoded transmissions. Scientists who had spent months on the Void Rim signal problem sent messages to Captain Farr's office that ranged from formal requests for collaboration to things that were barely held together as professional correspondence at all. 2 Vrethian logic weavers submitted a joint paper to the Conclave Academic Registry within 36 hours, attempting to retroactively explain why biological memory encoding was actually consistent with their original analytical framework. The paper was not convincing, but it was fast. The Veil Ori remained outside the station, patient as ever, their great forms drifting slowly in the dark. They continued to communicate only through Ethan's terminal. They did not insist on this. They stated simply that they found the channel clean and the voice on the other end of it honest, and that they preferred to continue using it until broader communication frameworks could be built properly. The Conclave's High Chair, a title held by rotation among the senior civilizations, sent a formal communication to Captain Farr, indicating that Earth's diplomatic status was under review. Not a disciplinary review, an elevation review. The High Chair's message used the words, "in light of recent events." Ethan read the message, set it down, and went back to his work. On the second day, the Elder Flame transmitted a long and detailed document through the channel. A record of the species the Veil Ori had seeded, the worlds they had touched, and the specific biological memory signatures they had embedded in each one. It was the most significant piece of historical data the Conclave had ever received. The Karathi archivists, when the document was shared with the chamber, went into a collective silence that lasted almost an hour. The document also included something else. It listed the species the Veil Ori had reached out to through the Void Rim signal, the ones they had believed might still carry the memory encoding in their biology. Humanity was on the list. So were 5 other species. All 5 had their own scientists working on the signal, and all 5 had failed to decode it. What the document noted, carefully and without judgment, was that all 5 of the other species had at some point in their development purged or deprioritized their oldest biological and ecological archives as their civilizations modernized. They had moved forward, as civilizations do, and left certain quiet records behind. Earth had not. Earth had digitized its deep-sea research from a century ago and kept it in open archives, where a sleepless human could find it at 2 in the morning while cataloging low-priority data files. The Karathi archivist who had ignored Ethan's note card at the translation session came to find him on the afternoon of the second day. He was a very old being. His shell armor had the faded, layered quality of something worn for many decades, and he moved slowly and with great deliberateness. He found Ethan in the corridor outside the communications room, standing with a cup of coffee and his personal tablet. The archivist stopped in front of him and was silent for a moment. Then he said in the common tongue, "I received your question, on the card. I read it." Ethan looked at him. "I know," he said. "I set it aside," the archivist said. "I should not have." "You had 40,000 years of records and found nothing," Ethan said. "It was a reasonable conclusion." "It was a comfortable conclusion," the archivist said. "There is a difference." He paused. "I would like to review your analytical framework, if you are willing to share it." "Of course," Ethan said. He sent it to the archivist's device right then, standing in the corridor. The archivist looked at his device for a moment. Then he looked back at Ethan. "The Marine Biology Archives," he said slowly. "I would not have thought to look there in 10,000 more years." "Neither would I, really," Ethan said. "I was just working through a list." The archivist made a sound that was the Karathi equivalent of a long, thoughtful exhale. Then he nodded once, deeply, and walked away. On the third day, the conclave formally elevated Earth to full senior status. The announcement was made in Chamber 7, with the full delegation present. Princess Liara, as chair, read the decision in a clear and even voice. The Veilori had formally recommended the elevation. The conclave's senior members had agreed unanimously, not, the announcement noted, as a political courtesy, but as a recognition of documented contribution to the collective knowledge of all species present. There was no dramatic reaction in the chamber. Most of the delegates had seen the bow. They had processed what it meant over the past 2 days. By the time the formal announcement came, it felt more like a record being corrected than a surprise being delivered. Ethan sat in the back row, the same place he always sat. Nina was beside him. When the announcement was finished, she looked at him and waited for a reaction. He wrote something in his notepad. She leaned over to look. It read, "Need to start on the other signal archives. 5 more species, probably similar frameworks. Check their oldest biological records first." She stared at it. Then she looked at him. "You are unbelievable," she said. "The work doesn't stop because something good happened," he said mildly. She thought about that. Then she said, "Fair," and opened her own tablet. Princess Liara found Ethan that evening. He was in a side corridor near the communications room, sitting on a bench with his tablet and his cold coffee, working. She came alone, no attendants, no Lord Sylvan, no formal escort. She was still dressed for the chamber, her silver-gold wings folded neatly, but there was something in her manner that was different from every other time he had seen her. More direct. She stopped in front of him. He looked up. "Lieutenant Commander Cole," she said. "Princess Liara," he said. She was quiet for a moment, and he had the sense that she had thought carefully about what she wanted to say, and was now deciding whether the words were right. "At the reception," she said, "I looked at you and I decided what you were worth before you had spoken more than your name. I did not do it with cruelty. I did it without thinking, which is a different kind of failure, and in a leader, perhaps a worse one." Ethan listened. "I am not asking for your forgiveness," she said. "That would make this about my comfort. I am telling you that I was wrong, because you deserve to hear that said plainly." He considered her for a moment. Then he stood up and held out his hand. The human gesture, palm forward, offered simply. She looked at it, A very brief pause, the kind that meant she was recalling something she had looked up. Then she reached out and took his hand and shook it once, carefully, the way someone does when they want to get a new thing right. "A formal introduction," she said, "the one I should have given you at the reception." "I accept," he said. She almost smiled. It was a small thing, quickly controlled, but it was there. Then she inclined her head once and walked away down the corridor. Nina appeared from around the corner, approximately 4 seconds later. She had clearly been just out of sight the entire time. "I was not listening," she said. "You absolutely were," he said. She sat down beside him on the bench and said nothing for a moment. Outside the viewport at the end of the corridor, the Veilori were still visible. 3 vast ancient shapes, drifting in the patient dark, their cold light moving in its slow and steady pulse. "What do you think they are, really?" Nina asked. "After everything?" Ethan looked at them for a moment. "Old," he said. "Very old. And very tired of being the only ones who remember. I think they just wanted someone to still know the same things they knew, even a little, even by accident." Nina was quiet. Then she said, "That's kind of sad." "A little," he agreed. "But they found it, in the end." He looked back at his tablet and opened the next file, Protein Chain Archives, from a species called the Xanath, flagged as biologically uninteresting by every scientist who had looked at them for the past 60 years. He started reading. Outside, the elder flame's light pulsed once, slow and warm, like a fire that has finally found somewhere safe to rest. The stars were very still,